Hi everyone, this is Nikhil. I hope you can all hear me well. So we are going to be talking about modeling APIs and how do we model APIs as products, how do we really represent business capabilities that our businesses are trying to build around, and more importantly from an engineering domain organization, how do we connect this to the notion of bounded context and domain driven design. So all of us are doing all of these things, but it's very hard still to get really kind of a combination of these things right in order to get our results. So let's first look at some of the guiding principles that drive our thinking. So bounded context is important because we need to make sure that the capabilities, the business capabilities that we are trying to build around are not overlapping, they are isolated, and they are collectively exhaustive but mutually exclusive, right? So we need to make sure that that is the case. In order to get these capabilities or capability driven product approach to really take shape, we need to ensure that there is no fragmentation in terms of ownership of those business capabilities. So we need exactly one product and one engineering owner for each capability. We'll talk about what should be the granularity when we talk about capability based products or product composition. So then we need to figure out what is the quality bar for our capabilities. So we may have capabilities, it may work for some, it may not work for some others. So everything that we build has distinct quality kind of thresholds or measures that are split across design, functional and operational maturity. So again, we need to have a maturity model to have an objective way of figuring out where we stand for each one of these quality criteria. These capabilities have to be reusable. So if they are not reusable, then they are basically one of product specific use case experiences that we are trying to build as products, which is not right, which is certainly not low enough to invest in as a platform. So anything that is a platform component, that's API product or an event driven product, has to have a high degree of reuse. And lastly, we need to have an API portfolio that is shaped by boundaries dictated by product or capability descriptions and not by organization, right? So a lot of times the way we are organized is aligned with the efficiency of execution, and that siloed organizational arrangement or structure may not be what our capabilities or what our products should reflect, right? In fact, our customers may not care about how we are organized, and that is something to be explicitly managed. So in short, right, what we have are platform products. These are core capabilities of any business, any organization that we put together as building blocks of everything that we do. These are typically delivered as API products, and APIs are inclusive of both synchronous APIs as well as asynchronous event driven or message driven APIs. On top of it, we have again experience products that are not mobile or web applications. They are not specific applications. These are APIs that or events that are closer to applications that would be consuming those. And then we have the actual experiences, and those are the experience products that could be anything, right? They could be coming in from provider of that capability, that could be coming in from partners who have access to some privileged API products that we might stand up, and then there are developers at large, the whole open ecosystem, and I would just use the term open APIs to support those, right? So we could have open APIs, we could have partner APIs, we could have internal APIs. All of these are driving what we build together as products and roll out to our customers. So when we are trying to organize capabilities as products, we certainly have to have a design first approach or an API first approach. So we need to have everything that we are building, including the capability descriptions and the API descriptions, in a schematic way. So I think best way to do it is, and we are all here for this Open API specification conference. So Open API specifications do offer us the most, I would say, common and popular way of organizing our capabilities as products. So we can certainly use those. For asynchronous APIs, you must have seen async API spec, and that's another way of packaging our discoverable async API experiences. And then the important thing for capabilities is they need to be discoverable, they need to be assessed for their qualities, and we talked about the 3 different quality classifications there, and they need to be managed for product lifecycle. So these capabilities need to be managed just like any other product. So how do we organize our business capabilities so that they are discoverable? Not only discoverable, they are a source of truth for what we do as a business. So having a business capability model to organize all of our business capabilities is a great way of doing it. There are many different approaches and established models. Essentially, it is not very difficult, right? All we have to do is make sure that we don't confuse between what is a course level business capability or a course level grouping of business capabilities and what is a business function. So I think one thing that everyone still struggles with is what is an API, right? Is API a specific endpoint? Are we trying to model a certain support for a use case? Do we call set of endpoints as one API, or do we organize some related resources that work together into a deliberate organization unit that we call as an API product? So this is a struggle, right? How fine-grained, coarse-grained, or what is the shape and form of an API product? How do we decide on that? And the thing is, if you have consumers who are looking at different ways of consuming your APIs, sometimes you may have to package the same set of endpoints and maybe same set of resources differently for those different consumers. So having a handle of all business functions that we provide that are grouped by business capabilities is a good way of organizing business capabilities, right? So our business capability model should typically be a 3-tier structure, a 3-tier taxonomy, where we have business functions at the lowest level. They are kind of not debatable, right? They are very specific use case descriptions of business functionality, and we can put them together. I have just put an example here that tells us the granularity there, right? So we could have things like accounts and addresses and profiles for a customer or a user domain. We may have these things show up as our business functions. So again, business functions are not just a singular function, they are groups of functions that work together. So we are focused on the functional view there. The next level of organization is grouping under business capabilities. So we take a set of related business functions and organize them as discrete, distinct business capabilities. Again, I think we have to keep on applying the principle that it has to be collectively exhaustive, this whole organization, and mutually exclusive. So if you see overlaps, then we got a problem with our model. Once we have our distinct business capabilities, we can group them into what is known as a business capability group or a bounded context. So again, I think we will talk about this further, but bounded contexts typically could be debated as should these be coarse grained, should these be fine grained, what is the level of granularity where it becomes difficult to really stick to the right definition of a bounded context, right? How do we make sure that each bounded context is completely representing its set of business functions or core capabilities in an autonomous way. So the second thing, that tool that we have to manage capabilities as products, is a maturity model. So once we have organized our capabilities, and we may not have a lot of maturity in how we do things, but it's important to capture everything that we do in our business capability model. In fact, progressive companies and organizations even pick up everything that is aspirational, that we are not really building right now, but aspire to, also in our business capability model. Once you apply the maturity model, which is kind of a set of very objective criteria that can assess the design quality, that is the interface quality, the functional quality, that means the implementation quality, what is the code coverage, how well we have implemented those abstract APIs. And then the third one is the operational quality, right? Have we defined SLAs, and are we really meeting those SLAs? How reliable are our implementations? Are they completely conformant with the design or the contract they claim to honor, right? So all of this goes in the operational maturity bucket. So having those objective assessment criteria and having the ability to apply those criteria as rules, a lot of them are applied as automation driven rules. Some of these criteria are very subjective, and you need your API kind of platform folks to be managing those, right? So you could have API review boards within your companies, you could have other ways of more decentralized domain level architecture functions that can help with applying the more subjective assessment criteria. But the important thing is, every business capability that is live has to have a maturity model with scores attributed to all those three maturity criteria, all those three maturity classifications. And the third thing in there is product life cycle. Everything that we do, manage or build or design as capabilities has to be managed as products. And that means we need to have the notion of versioning, ownership, release management, customer communications, and life cycle management that we apply uniformly across the board. So this is typically how our maturity model would look like, right? So for each one of the criteria, right, design, each one of the classifications, design, functional and operational, we would have a set of, and typically you would see 15 to 30 different criteria that would show up, and they might be bucketed under things like standards, compliance, portfolio management, encapsulation, documentation, performance, right, SLA definition and measurement, and so on. So there could be any number of maturity levels, typically 5. The important thing is we need to be very clear as to what is the minimum threshold of maturity for different capabilities to go live. So again, for large companies and organizations, it might be typical for different organizations to pick up a different maturity level, right, or commit to a different maturity level for their release criteria. So more mature organizations might insist on everything being maturity level 5 before it can be released. Some others that are still evolving could settle for a 3 or a 4. In a typical maturity model, level 4 would be something where you can start externalizing things. So if you have external open APIs, you should typically plan to go at level 4 or 5. This is a complex problem, right? I think if you have 50 odd rules that dictate the quality of your product, both on the design as well as on the implementation side of things, it's a fairly complicated kind of matrix to always be assessed in an objective and non-biased way. But once you do this, it solves a lot of complex problems, right? For your management, how do we plan what capabilities we should be betting on or building on, right? How do we drive investment decisions on what we should do, what we should not? A lot of companies have tons of duplication and fragmentation across these capabilities. So the moment you take your existing products and align them to this capability model as well as ascribe a maturity score to it, the vision becomes very clear as to where we are spending our cycles, where we should kind of plan and invest, and if we have mergers and acquisitions or divestitures, we know what are the capabilities that are going to be complementary or supplementary to what we have. So another thing is, when we manage APIs as products, we have to understand that these APIs are not just an engineering detail. So a lot of companies still have API management treated as an engineering concern, right? It's something that product folks are not actively managing. So to manage APIs and platforms as products, we have to recognize that these are technology enablers and these are powerful business tools. So while technology decisions kind of are a function of engineering teams, these API products are powerful business deliverables, and that is how they should be looked at. Another thing is, we typically apply project management approaches to building APIs as products, and that's where things start failing. So it is a product discipline and not just a one-off technology product, and these products are owned by business and they are driven by technology. So we have to make sure that business owners are the drivers and responsible parties for API products, and that's the only way to have APIs and platforms show up as core business drivers. Again, when we think about reuse, a lot of us are very creatively reusing code, and I think that goes without saying, we have to do that. But reuse of that code and fragmenting it across a lot of different domains, lot of different products, is not the right way of reusing capabilities. So it simply means that when it comes to business capabilities, we should have zero tolerance for any kind of duplication. It doesn't mean duplication cannot exist, because what we inherit is what we inherit, but we should then, as we manage this going forward, figure out how to deprecate some of the duplicated, fragmented API products or platform products in favor of those that we choose as meeting the quality bar. External access is again a big debate in most of the companies. When we are building APIs, a lot of I think variability is brought in, because we treat internal APIs as something that don't require the level of rigor that we need for external APIs. And that's not true, because it's just an evolution cycle. There is nothing like internal or external APIs. It is just a business decision on what should be internal and what should not, what cannot be externalized. It should not be a technical limitation. So if you need to flip the switch on an API being externally available, and if you cannot do it because of the way it is structured, so I think authorization model is one great place where we see things fall apart, right? You have different approaches to how you secure your APIs internally versus externally. And with massive cloud-based distribution or distributed architectures, I think that whole problem is showing up as important, right? So I think it's important not to treat different API products as different based on their proposed internal or external consumption. Everything should be externalizable. The actual kind of decision on whether it is externally available or not should be a business decision and should never be limited by how we have built it. Another thing is, once we have these capabilities built in the right way, application development becomes very easy. So capability development is a rigorous thing, and that means you require good engineering strength to build robust capabilities, because they are not going to be changing that fast. They are deep investments, and that should lead to stable services or service-based products that represent those capabilities. Applications, on the other side, right, should be something that we should be able to stitch from these business capabilities, and we should be able to build these applications in a fraction of time they typically used to take. So when I was at PayPal, our typical cycle for application development for large and complex initiatives was 18 months. So that means there would be a pre-December planning cycle that would plan all core application deliverables over the next 2 years, and average time would be 18 months. Once they changed everything to this capability based approach, and once they executed on it, the average application development time from conception to release went down to 3 weeks, right? And this is average, and that means there were some applications built as fast as within a couple of days. So once you do that, the cost of development of those applications, as well as the life cycle, the agility of the life cycle of those applications become very different and distinct, right? That means there is more appetite for product managers to experiment, to try out things, to pivot without wasting a lot of investment in what we build and what we take to the market. In fact, that allows our customers to demand whatever they want and provide us with the ability to meet those customer expectations almost in real time, right? So that is a big shift once we get into this stable foundational capability base that is utilized by a very agile application layer that is easy and inexpensive to build. And that means our application shelf life reduces to typically, on an average, 1 to 3 years. Right now, investment in application development is so high that if our applications can't be there for 5 years or more, we wouldn't be funding those developments. So that is a big shift once you have your investment into stable capability platforms and not into deep siloed applications that funnel through all layers. Yeah, so this is how typically application assembly would look like. You would have a stable foundation of capabilities that you could stitch into any applications, and then this is just a 2-layer view, but you could have any number of layerings in how you compose these application orchestrations further into more custom applications. Now, as we see the explosion of microservices architectures, and as we see more adoption of domain-driven design on the implementation side of things, we need to connect these two notions, API-based products and capability-based APIs to how we build those services that power those APIs. So the big question is, what is an API, right? Is it an endpoint? Is it an operation? Is it a product? So getting that granularity right is very important. And what I have seen is open API specs, in fact, in the last 5 years, they have started acting as not only product definitions but also type definitions. So a lot of schemas that should ideally be defined in JSON schema or protocol buffers or GraphQL types are all being embedded into open API specs. So bloated open API specs that kind of go across the notion of more than one product is also a problem, right? So what we can do to solve that problem is simply keep one open API spec to align with the product definition as the customer should see it. So because discoverability is driven by these schemas, we have to have a more customer centric approach in how we organize our APIs. Synchronous and asynchronous also comes into picture. So if we have asynchronous APIs, we should use the discipline to use async API definitions to describe those API products. When we apply domain driven design, again that is a challenging endeavor in any company. So domain boundaries get confused with team structures. So when we do an initial domain analysis, team structures is what is how a certain product or a company is evaluated, and we need to get out of that. So we could have domains that could span across multiple teams, and we can be creative about how to have a singular ownership for our domains, as we talked earlier. There's also the notion of bounded context. So how do we now define what is a bounded context? Is our domain, that is kind of a delivery mechanism for our services, should it correspond one-to-one with a bounded context, or could there be a loose mapping of bounded context to domains? So typically we could have multiple bounded contexts within a domain, and I think if you look at domain driven design, they would recommend that subdomains are what would correspond to a bounded context, and that sounds about right. So not defining these bounded contexts at a higher or a coarse grain of abstraction helps actually maintain the sanctity of those bounded contexts over a long period of time. API visibility is yet another point of contention. So we just have to make sure that no matter how, whether we need to expose it to limited set of partners or to public at large, we design them exactly the same way and use visibility annotations to figure out how we should deploy those. So externalizability should be a key requirement on how we build and deliver our APIs. All public APIs need to have a certain minimum maturity threshold to cross, and I think in most maturity models that I have seen, it would typically be a level 4 where that you need to meet in order to be externalizable. We need to have common standards across, for not only for our API definitions which we have, but also for the type schema or type definitions that provide the vocabulary that connects the entire bounded context. So common standards for messages, events, type definitions and APIs is something that we should use across those different domains in our companies. If we work for larger companies, there would be other adjacencies that you would be working with. So subsidiaries and adjacencies again should have their own standards, but right, it should allow us to interoperate across entities within larger corporate boundaries. So in the end, how do we make all of this possible, right? So there are too many players, too many engineering teams, product folks who also need to know how to represent APIs and platforms as the products that they are building, managing, and selling and monetizing. So a lot of education is involved. We need to be talking to all of these stakeholders all the time, making sure that both the business capability model and the maturity assessment that we apply to these capabilities is extremely transparent and visible to all stakeholders. So you would see that there is a lot of resistance in agreeing to follow these rules. So a lot of teams would think of creating a capability model or applying a maturity assessment as hindrances to their autonomy and their agility, and this is something that would most likely show up in some domains not participating as much as some others, and that's fine as long as we have very transparent reporting on how those who are participating are driving benefits out of their participation. As long as we can showcase that success, everyone else will follow suit. We need to focus on portfolios. So we need to have strong capability leaders that drive kind of building up of the portfolio, and the laggers would follow soon. And when we are designing our portfolio of capabilities, we need to prioritize consumers over API developers, right? So while developing these products, typically your architects and engineers are going to be shaping these API products. We have to make sure that we take away the developer bias and bring in more robust API product management or platform product management, howsoever we might call it, as a voice in dictating the shape of the portfolio. And then non-code deliverables, right, that where quality of service and how, right, utility and product market fit kind of drive these APIs and platforms should be brought into the conversation as well, right? So it's not only about, right, how we it is also about how we put in the quality of service, customer expectations, and the product market fit into that equation. So any questions anyone has about transformational journeys that you might be having at your companies, or governance or organization of your API or platform products, I would be happy to answer. Yeah. Yes.
So how do you find coping with the tension between trying to keep stable domain boundaries and the ever-shifting sands of what the boundaries of products that people want to take to market are?
Okay. So that's a good question. Everything that would be capability driven, so the definition of business capability is it represents stable business functions. So when we looked at the 3-layer taxonomy for our business capabilities, the bottom pieces, the business functions that we have, they are stable descriptions of what our businesses do. And that means these capability definitions are as good as the robust businesses or expectations that our customers have had for eternity. And that means a capability based product view is going to be stable, and it's going to be normalized. It's going to look very much like how your competitors are doing business. So your product view and your domain view should mirror and align as we go. I think if your question is how do we package the experiences, the actual products and services that we are building and taking to our customers, that is the experience layer that I talked about, right? And we could have any number of arbitrary combinations of these capabilities to drive value. So, in fact, right, if you look at your product experiences that you sell to your customers, they would very often be going all over, right? They would be orchestrations that go over multiple capabilities. So, I think there should be no tension between how we organize and how we look ourselves as a capability based product structure versus what our customers can leverage out of these capabilities that and in fact, right, our whole endeavor why we are doing this is to enable any combination of our capabilities, not only ours but others as well. And how do we allow our developers as well as partner developers as well as developers at large to bring in the creativity to mix and match and build more out of these more foundational pieces. Yes.
The title of the workshop is Modeling API. Where are the models?
Sorry, I did not get the answer.
The title of the workshop is Modeling API.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen no model.
So this is about modeling APIs as business capabilities, modeling APIs as products, and then connecting bounded context and domain driven design to the whole mix.
Do you realize model? Do you make model or not?
So your API design, so let me go back here. Right here. So there are three things that we are applying here to manage APIs as products and to manage, in fact, even platforms as products, right? We are applying a capability model to organize, a maturity model to assess, and a product life cycle to manage those things. So definition of our capabilities as schematically described APIs, and when I say APIs, it's broader, right? It's not just synchronous APIs, but also asynchronous events and messaging. All of those descriptions is the result of our modeling exercise, right? How we organize our schemas for API products, for shared parts of those API products, the type vocabulary, yeah, this is all about that. Right. Thank you all.